So I was taking a look at the analytics for my channel, trying to figure out what went wrong. Why is this channel so dead? And I kept looking through the data and I really couldn't find any answers. But I saw one statistic that really jumped out at me. And that has to do with my audience based on gender. You can see the numbers right here. It pretty much tells its own story. 99.1% of my viewers are male, and only 0.9% are female. That's actually pretty crazy, and it kind of goes into what I want to talk about for today's video. Why don't women play video games? Because this channel is really focused on general gaming topics. I talk about the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One. I guess now I talk about the PS5 and Series X because those are the new consoles. And I also spend a lot of time talking about PC gaming, just general gaming topics, things that are happening in the video game industry, and just overall my favorite memories with gaming. And I just like to share my stories with video games. Like, that's something I've been doing lately, kind of deviating from the whole, like, news cycle thing. You know, all these gaming YouTubers talking about all the latest news stories. I've been kind of, like, not doing that. I've been doing my own thing, just, like, sharing my memories, kind of being, like, a gaming vlog channel. So, just this channel is all general gaming stuff, right? So, you would think that if women were really interested in that type of content, that I would have a lot, the numbers would be a lot higher than 0.9%. I mean, come on, 0.9%, that's less than a full percent. That's actually pretty crazy. So, yeah, it just seems like women in general aren't very interested in gaming content. I don't think it's about me. I do have another channel, Mr. NoobTube Gamer, which is my COD channel, that where the female viewership is a little bit better. I have about 3% viewership from women. That's still very low. It actually makes sense, though, because the more I think about my life and all the girls and all the women that I've known, whether it be friends, family members, or whatever, I didn't know a lot of females that actually played video games, actually play them seriously, right? Because you think of the big releases on console and PC, like Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Cyberpunk, whatever it is. I didn't know a lot of women that played games like that, because there really weren't a lot of women out there that did. And that still is true today. I know they have that statistic out there that says, oh, 50% of the world's gamers are women. But that's kind of a misleading statistic because it doesn't take into account the fact that a lot of the women that do play video games, they're not playing Call of Duty, they're not playing Assassin's Creed, they don't even own a console or a PC. They are playing on their mobile phone. They're playing Candy Crush, Words with Friends, whatever games that you play on your phone. I don't really know because I'm not much of a mobile gamer myself. But yeah, that's pretty much most of the games that women do play. So that's where that statistic comes in of half of the world's gaming population being women. It doesn't really tell the complete story, right? So there's definitely a huge disconnect between men and women in video games. I mean, when you go like on an online game, you rarely hear women actually on the mic. I think part of that is because of how fucking creepy men can be online, like catcalling and hitting on girls and trying to get their number over Xbox Live. Yeah, there's some fucking creepy motherfuckers out there, and I can't blame a woman for muting their mic or not wanting to get on the microphone, because I'm a guy and I don't even want to be on the mic because of how fucking awful people are online. And as far as the YouTube space goes, it's still very dominated by men. Like, you don't have too many female streamers and female gamers. I mean, there are a lot of them, but I would say there are a lot more male streamers than female ones. It's great that more women are getting involved in gaming, but it's still, like, just a huge gap as far as engagement in, like, the big AAA releases by men compared to women. I think that just comes down to how video games have been marketed over the years. They've definitely been marketed more towards boys and men than they have been for women. It's kind of like how, with the opposite way, you had the Barbie dolls and the Bratz dolls. You didn't have boys in those commercials. So it's kind of like the opposite for video game consoles and video games. That was kind of seen as a boy's toy. So I think men were definitely more exposed to video games during their childhood than women were in general, because I did know a lot of girls during my childhood. They had their pink Nintendo DS's and they would play Nintendogs or even Mario Kart. But what happened after the DS? They graduated to the smartphone, because back when the DS was a thing, the smartphone didn't really come out yet. So, yeah, all those girls that were playing Nintendo back then, or just the people in general that were very casual gamers, they didn't, like, play, like, real video games, I would call them, even though, I guess, like, who am I to say what a real video game is? But you know what I mean, like, the big AAA games on PC and console. Women just don't seem to express nearly as much interest in those titles compared to men. And I always hear the argument that, oh, it's because women, they're squeamish towards violence, they're more sensitive towards violence, and, you know, that is most of the AAA games that you see. They're very violent, right? I just think that's a bullshit argument that, oh, it's because women, they're more sensitive than men are. Because you have TV shows out there, like The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, where there's a pretty equal interest in those shows split between men and women. There are a lot of women that are into The Walking Dead. I would say it's an equal amount of women that like that show compared to men, and there's so much violence in the show. I mean, it's a fucking show where they kill zombies and people get bit and they get eaten alive by walkers, and yeah, it's just like, there's a lot of violence. That's pretty much what the show is centered on. I mean, it has a lot of storytelling and whatnot, but still, it's like, it's a violent show. But there's still a lot of women that watch it. It's pretty much equally split. So then how come, you know, with violent video games, it's a different story? Like, women are less interested. Because women are less interested in video games in general compared to men. So I don't think it's a valid argument to say, oh, it's because women are more sensitive to violence in video games, that they're just not as interested in that type of content than men are. Because if you look at TV shows and movies and even music where people are, like, singing and rapping about killing each other, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't see how, like, women, they're interested in that stuff, but they're not into the video games. It has to do with just the accessibility of video games in general, how they're less accessible to women than men. And I kind of talked about it with men being raised more towards video games, and it just being more of a men thing, a manly thing, whatever you want to say. Like, it's just been more conditioned to be a men's hobby than a women's hobby. So as a result, less women have been gravitating towards it. That's the simplest explanation I can come up with. It just seems more like a cultural thing than anything else. Video games being more of a manly culture, and women kind of feeling excluded from it as a result. I mean, you could say the exact opposite when it comes to beauty and, you know, those type of things, like, you know, makeup or whatever. There are a lot less men that are interested in that kind of stuff than women. Of course, you know, lately over the past few years, you've had more men interested in beauty and stuff like that. But, you know, I'd imagine if someone that runs a beauty channel, they'd have similar statistics than mine, just the opposite way. So they'd have like 1% of their viewers being men and 99% women. So there are just certain things that are more marketed towards one gender compared to the other. And video games is one of those things that have just been conditioned to be enjoyed by men more than women, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense logically. Like, there's no reason why women would enjoy video games less than men, other than the fact that men were more exposed to it compared to women, and therefore if you are a woman that's trying to get into video games, it's a lot more intimidating, and there's a lot more of a learning curve to get used to, right? As opposed to someone like me that has grown up with video game consoles and video game systems for at least 20 years now. I've been exposed to gaming so much. Compare that to a girl that, you know, maybe they had a DS as a child, but never really had a chance to get into, like, the serious games, the games that were more involved than Nintendo or whatever. You know what I mean? So that's why I think there's a huge gap. And I guess as far as, like, how to resolve it, that's just beyond the scope of this video. I have no idea. I guess just try to include more women in video games. You know, that's another thing, is that the general direction of video games, as far as the people that make them, as far as the people that write them, it's definitely a male-dominated industry. There are more women getting involved, but that's a huge thing you see, trying to push more women to get involved in STEM and to get more involved in not just the video game industry, but STEM as a whole, because it's something that is just so male-dominant, even though it's something that women could easily do just as good as men, right? I mean, because we're all human, we're all just as capable as each other if we put our minds to it. We could do whatever we want, but we also have these norms based on your gender that, oh, if you're a woman, well, you have to cook, you have to be in the kitchen. And of course, we've seen less of that over the years. We've had, you know, more of a feminist culture, I guess you could say, where women are more encouraged to just do whatever they want, or, you know, like, just have more options available to them. And there's less of an expectation that, oh, if you're a woman, you have to get pregnant and have a baby at 20 and be a kitchen slave for the rest of your life. Like, hey, if you're a woman and you want to do that, that's fine, but it should be your choice. I think that's a thing that just sucks about how these roles in society work, is that these roles are assigned to you and you feel kind of like you're in a trap. And I know it seems like I'm kind of getting off topic because it's supposed to be about video games, but I think video games are a good example of this, is that, well, if you're a woman, it's kind of weird for you to play video games because that's just not like, you know, it's kind of viewed in less of a positive way than a man playing video games, because if you're a woman playing a game, you feel like more of an outsider, I would imagine, because of just how few women are in it. You have female protagonists in video games, but again, these are characters written by mostly men. You have so much less women involved in the industry, in the actual creation of the game, so you're seeing the female character through the eyes of a man, right? So that might also play a role in women feeling less included in video games, is just the fact that video game industry is less inclusive towards women in general. And I guess it's less relatable as a result because most of the characters are written by men compared to women, and men are a lot more involved in the creative process than women are. You also hear a lot from people like Anita Sarkeesian that talk about, well, the women characters that you do have in video games, like Lara Croft, for example, they're too hypersexualized. There's too much of a focus on their cleavage and, you know, certain features and certain body characteristics that it takes away from the actual character development, and women, as a result, are viewed as objects. I really don't see that as an issue in video games in general. I mean, you have those Japanese video games that definitely do a lot of that, but I think the video games that do have strong female characters, they do it really well, like Tomb Raider, and even Dragon Age Origins. Morrigan was a really fleshed out character, even though she was definitely very sexualized. Like, I mean, Nathan Drake, you can argue, is also sexualized in a way because he's a very good looking guy. Most women would find him attractive, right? So it cuts both ways. So I don't see that being like a huge thing that turns women away from video games. There are men in general that sexualize women, objectify women, especially in video game culture. But as far as like the actual video games themselves, I don't think they do a terrible job when they do include female characters. I just think we could see more of it, and that would be a good thing. 'Cause I could imagine that women trying to get into video games, they see that most of the characters, most of the playable characters are men. It kind of sends the signal that video games, they're a manly thing because you have so many men and so many male playable characters, not a lot of women. So I think in that way it kind of turns some women away from video games in general. I'm not even trying to say we should go full-on woke with our video games, like, you know, what they try to do with Battlefield 5, everyone's Battlefield, women fighting in World War II. I mean, there's some cases where inclusion may not be a good fit for the setting of the game, especially if it's a historical setting, because inclusion wasn't a thing in history, right? Like, back in World War II, women were not allowed to fight in combat. Women were not allowed to do a lot of things many years ago. So if you have a game that takes place during that time, yeah, obviously, you should be true to that time period. But if it's a game that takes place in a modern setting, there's no reason why women shouldn't be included in those games, why you shouldn't have strong female characters. It seems like this is something that didn't really become an issue until, I would say, I don't know, the PlayStation 1 came out, because before then, with the Nintendo Entertainment System back in the mid to late 80s, there was pretty much an equal split between boy and girl gamers. But at some point, it became more of a boy thing for whatever reason. I have no idea why that is. Video games are a great medium. It's, you know, another form of art, like a TV show or a movie or an actual painting. You know what I mean? Like, it's a beautiful form of art, and it's a shame that a significant chunk of the population just isn't involved in it. It's, you know, it's kind of a bummer. It really is. Women are definitely missing out on a lot. And, you know, again, there are women that are involved. There are women that do love video games, but it can definitely be a lot more than what we have now. It's not something that is just a simple solution, because this is just a cultural thing that is beyond the scope of a YouTube video or just even talking about it. It's something that needs to change on a cultural level, and that is just something that will take a lot of time in order to be accomplished. But I think a good start would be, if you see a woman in voice chat in a game, don't be a fucking creep to them. Don't try to hit on them and do weird shit. Just, like, treat them like an actual human being. I think that would be a good way to make women feel more included in video games. I know the typical fucking guy online is not going to care about how a woman feels. They only care about themselves. But it would be nice if we were a little bit more respectful for each other, just in general, but especially towards women. Holy shit. And the way women are treated online, especially if they have their mic turned on, it's pretty awful. I think we've all seen it before. But yeah, I just want to share my thoughts on women in video games because it's something I never really discussed on this channel, and I want to just make a video on it before I wrap up the channel and stop making videos very soon. It seems like the issue of women in video games is a very taboo thing to discuss, but I really don't care. What are you guys gonna do? Unsubscribe from a channel that I'm gonna stop fucking making videos for in a matter of days anyway? I really don't care. Plus, if you're the type of person to get offended at the idea of more women being involved in video games, then I really wouldn't mind if someone like you unsubscribed. Because I don't see how anyone can object to that. I really don't. I think it would be a great thing if women became more involved in video games than they are right now. Because right now it feels like such a male-dominated space, and there's really no reason why it should be that way.